Good morning. Well, thank you. That was a warm welcome. I do feel so welcome here because this feels a little bit like home for me. I am here and so grateful to be with all of you for many reasons. One is as an elder in the Missouri Conference, I have served past churches, large and small, as a pastor, one of which was Gashland United Methodist Church, right down the road here. And that's when I fell in love with the Northland. My husband and I, and my husband's here with me today as well, we fell in love with the Northland, and we now live right up here off of Vivian Road. And so I represent, though, your Missouri United Methodist Foundation. Instead of serving a church, I serve through the foundation, and I call it yours because most people don't even know they have a Missouri United Methodist Foundation, but you do. And we are separate from the Missouri Conference, but we work alongside the conference, helping churches live into their mission, helping churches be able to be financially solvent, helping churches know how to create a culture of generosity, helping churches invest funds, all kinds of things. In fact, I preached here a year ago and also offered a Putting Your House in Order workshop that some of you might have attended. Do you have your house in order yet? I'm here to check up on you all. I've also helped Pastor Mary kick off the Atypical group and helped her start that support group for families with atypical children. And but then I look around here and I have my good friend Pastor Jen, who was my mentor when I went through ministry candidacy. I have family, I have neighbors, I have former parishioners here. This feels like home. Thank you for allowing me to be with you today. And it's also a joy to be here because when I offered to preach today, I didn't know what the sermon series would be, and I said, I'm willing to preach on anything. And Mary comes back to me and says, we're going to do a sermon series on favorites. Pick your favorite scripture and preach on it. My response to her was, so many favorite scriptures and so little time. You know, there's so many of them. And because I am in a different church every Sunday working with different congregations, I said to Mary, can I just pick a favorite sermon instead? And so I came with a scripture that I have really grown to love, but it was a scripture I struggled with early on in life, but I found a way to truly understand it. I want to share that with you today. And with it is a sermon that I have preached before and always enjoy it. Let's see how it goes this time as well, okay? But I'm going to start with the scripture first off. And it comes from Matthew 2, verses 13 through 17. And, well, we're off to a great start. So just sit back and listen, and you don't need any visuals, okay? You ready? Matthew 2, 13 through 17. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting in the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. You may recall Levi becomes Matthew later on. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with them and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were the Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Did you catch that? It's not the wealthy who need a doctor, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but I have come to call the sinners. Now that scripture is one I mentioned I have struggled with, especially many years ago, because I kept thinking in all the crowds, all the people that are following Jesus, all the people that he's walking through, why does he turn to a tax collector, a known sinner, and pick that man to follow him? It seems to me that Jesus is only inviting a messy relationship. Folks, it's Levi, eventually Matthew. He has a messy life. Not only was he a tax collector, he was a tax collector that had really done some nasty things. People were against him. He did not have many friends. I would think it's going to be a pretty messy relationship. I don't know about you folks, but those aren't the ones I usually go out seeking to find. But that's what Jesus went looking for. And then, not only does he say, follow me, he rewards Levi with a dinner, and dinner at his house of all things. He's there, and then Levi brings his friends around. If Levi is going to have a messy relationship, imagine his friends. Does Jesus have a clue what he's getting into in this situation? And I think that's why the Pharisees, they were the church people back then. The Pharisees don't like this at all either, and I kind of get it. And they say, Jesus, why do you eat with tax collectors and sinners? I've had those moments. I think we've all probably had those moments where we don't get it with what Jesus does. There's a moment where I think all of us really want Jesus right here with us. We want Jesus in our fellowship hall having a potluck dinner with us, not down at the bar with some people that are never even going to grace the door of the church. Jesus, why do you spend your time on them and you're not here with us? But Jesus has an answer for those people, for the Pharisees and for us. He says it's not the healthy that need the doctor, but it's the sick. Again, Jesus kind of talks in a way that we say, Jesus, can you just put it in plain words? Why do you come back with these comments that really make us think? And so really, I think the best way I can probably help us all get our head around the scripture and how it works is with a story. And the story that I have for you is about two very different men. The first man, he's a preacher, a theologian, a seminary professor. He's got a very mild-mannered personality, and I couldn't imagine him ever raising his voice with anyone. He's kind of the man that everybody would like as a neighbor. Not only would he let you borrow his lawnmower, he'd probably say, don't worry, I'll come mow it for you. He's the kind of guy that would listen and care, a man that has just a gentle spirit about him. And so many people that know him hold him in very high esteem, and mostly because of his integrity and what he does and how he holds himself. But the story is also about another man. It's about a man who has really come from several different states, different from the first man. They live so far away from each other. And the second man, he came to the United States from a war-torn country. It was in that country he lived in the utmost poverty. But out of that poverty, he had somebody that cared about him, helped him receive an education, and he came to the United States with next to nothing except that really good education in his pocket and a desire to work hard. And isn't that what America likes? Somebody who has a hunger to work hard, that has knowledge, and is willing to jump in. And that's exactly what he did. And he became very successful, even though it cost him the time with his family. He was no longer near his family that lived far away in another country. And he worked so hard when he was in the United States, he didn't have a lot of time for his family there as well. But he, too, was still highly respected by his family and by his colleagues. Now, these two men, they don't know each other. They are only tied together by one fact, and that is that I know both of them. One is my preaching professor when I was at St. Paul's School of Theology. The other one is a man who just happened to marry in to my family of origin. Let me first tell you, though, a little bit more about my professor. He was always well-dressed, but a very simple man. But in seminary classes, he always was telling us stories. He did so much teaching through the stories, and I learned so much from him. But probably the thing that I learned the most from him is that he taught me that we should always be around the table. We need to break bread with people. We need to be with people, and it's at that table, in that moment of where we share a meal together, we really get to know the heart of another person. On the other hand, this other man, because of my family member that came from another country, this man too loved to have people at his table. He would always entertain in his beautiful house. He loves to have people come to his summer home. He's a wonderful host. He likes to entertain at his country club, and I have never been out to dinner with him where I haven't heard him say to somebody, please, please come, join us. There's room for you here at our table. This man has exquisite taste in both food and wine. And his meals and entertainment, they always reflect him and all of his success. But even though these two men, that their lives look very different, both of these men have a lifetime of stories that they like telling people as they sit around the table with them. For example, my seminary professor, one of my favorite stories he told me was about when he was at an Amish restaurant. Have you folks ever been to an Amish restaurant? You know, it's an experience, and they kind of have their way of doing things, and you are a guest. It's beautiful hospitality when you go there. Well, my seminary friend said that he and one of his best friends were going there, and they were meeting 17 other people that night for dinner. They were kind of on a time schedule because one of their friends in the group was going to be honored at something else. And we all know how hard it is to get 19 people into a restaurant, right? So he got there in plenty of time to get a table. He gets there and he walks in and he talked about how he walked up to what looked like what we would call a hostess stand, you know, but it was an old pulpit that was there. Behind it stood an Amish man with his Amish hat and his Amish beard. And standing next to him was a sweet Amish daughter in her little dress and her little hat. And as he walked up in the crowded restaurant, there's a sign standing in front of that pulpit. And the sign says, "Do not put your name in until your entire party is here." So you understand what he has here, right? So, you know, my professor talked about how he had to weigh out, okay, how far are they away? How soon are they going to be here? How busy is the restaurant? How long is it going to take them to get this place and, you know, get a table for 19? And he took a deep breath and he said to the Amish man, "Party of 19," and gave his name. The Amish man looked at him and said, "Is your entire party here?" He took a breath and he said, "Yes." Now his good friend, who is also a theologian and a professor, overhears him do this. And so when he got back to his friend said, "Did you just lie to the Amish? You are not supposed to lie to the Amish. What's going to happen to you, you know?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. It's going to take a while. It's all going to work out." Well, 5 minutes later, when his name was called, the rest of the party was not there. So he turned to his friend and said, "You run out to the parking lot, you check to see if they're coming in. I'm going to make a quick phone call, see if they're here," which, come to find out, they were nowhere nearby. And he walked up to the Amish man with his Amish hat, his Amish beard, behind that pulpit, and says, "I have to confess, my party is not here." He said things went hush around him. That whole crowded area where everybody was waiting. And all of a sudden, the Amish man looked at him and said, "Did you lie to me?" And he said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Get your friend and follow me." And they started to walk through the restaurant. He said it was like the parting of the Red Sea. People just kind of moved aside. There was like silence. He said his palms were sweaty, his heart is racing, and he sees they're being led to a door in the back. And he is sure they're walking him out the back door. And he's thinking, what am I going to tell my friends? And they get to that back door, and the Amish man opens it up to a beautiful banquet room with seating for 19, with the aroma of fresh bread that is laid out across the table and bowls of homemade jam. The man looked at him and said, "This is for you. You are welcome to the table." He had put on a big smile and said, "This bread is for you because you are forgiven." Isn't that a pretty good story? Do you see why I like the seminary professor? He could hold my attention in class. I have thought of that story so many times over the years and what that must have been like. It's a good story of intrigue, but so is a good story about a fire happening in somebody's home, right? And that's what this other man, this family member of mine, the second man, he was dealing with. He had a fire happen in his home. The home was in the middle of construction. They had a home, but they were adding on an addition. And it was the day that all the electricians were there rewiring, putting electricity into the new part of the house, but it was coming from a breaker box in the main part of the house. And somehow, some way, things went wrong. An electrical fire started. I don't know if you've ever dealt with an electrical fire, but you can't see it because it's behind the walls. And the fire follows the electrical, work through the walls. And so all of a sudden, all the contractors and the workers in the building are putting holes throughout the entire house, the old and the new, and dousing flames that are happening behind the walls. And then when all of this had happened, this big, spacious, beautiful home is now scarred and smells of smoke. All I could think of when I heard of this story was, wow, was the contractor going to handle this? How much was it going to cost that contractor? Because after all, contractors are brought into houses to make them look better, not worse, right? And then I kept thinking about the employees. What about those men that were doing the electrical work? Would they lose their jobs over this? I'm sure they have families. What would it be like? But before I go further into that particular story, let's go back for a moment to my friend, the professor that was in that Amish restaurant. I want to kind of think about his experience there. It was a story for him about being invited to the table. Obviously, he was very humbled by the experience. I could hear it in his voice. He talked about the shame that he felt, the embarrassment, the feeling of other people looking at him, but all of those things were just consequences of his behavior. He never really specifically received a punishment from anybody. He was instead offered unsolicited favor. This man was offered grace at that table, even though he had lied. He was offered a grace that brought healing. But that's why, when I heard about this man, my family member, that had a fire in his house, that was caused by other people, that was destroying his beautiful home, I wondered how he just might respond to what had happened to him. Because this man had expectations for himself and for others around him. After all, we don't make it to the high spots of this world by not having expectations. And by no means would somebody like that normally lower their expectations. And I guess that's why I never expected to hear what happened next. Evidently, the head contractor had hurried to the scene because he wasn't even there when this happened. He got the call, and he gets there, and he's apologizing profusely to the homeowner. And I'm assuming, though, that he feels he's going to get really chewed out by that homeowner. Because often, isn't that what the wealthy do? They're like, you need to get it, and you need to get it done right. But instead, this contractor was met by understanding and a confession. The man explained to him, accidents happen. In fact, I've made mistakes in my own work. It's okay. A bit stunned, the contractor got his crew and they got back to work, and they're trying to solve the wiring problem and clean up the mess and repair all that damage that comes from all that fire and that water. And I got thinking, isn't it absolutely amazing what kind of work all of us can do when we're not being blamed for something? When we're given the freedom to make amends, when there's an expression of forgiveness that has been put upon us. I hope each of you have experienced that at some point of your life, because when it is, it's beautiful. I think that's beautiful, but really what the homeowner did next really is what caught my attention. Because as all these workers continued to work and get everything in order, you know what he did? He went shopping, but he went shopping at the grocery store. And he went and he found the best steaks he could find. He loves good steaks. And he bought those good steaks and bought lots of food, and he and his wife prepared a banquet for all those workers, complete with wine out of his private wine cellar. And at the end of that exhausting, emotional-filled day, he sat them all down at a table. He didn't make them eat in isolation. In fact, he sat right alongside them, and he cared for them. He broke bread with them. And he even packed up all the leftovers and sent them home to their families. Because there were those men that had caused that fire, they were offered unsolicited favor. They were showered with grace by that homeowner. Because it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it is the sick that do. As I was told about what happened that day, I started to think about that story from my professor, the one that he was shown all the grace for his mistake by the Amish. And he experienced that unsolicited favor, and he was offered grace, and he was invited to the table. The thing that joined these two men together is not just that I know both of them. What also joins them together is the remarkable stories that involve that special invitation to the table where they break bread together and you receive grace. One man was given grace, the other man offered the grace. Both show us that it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. It's not the righteous that are called to the table. It is the sinner that is called to the table.